The Artist's Journey, Early Life of the Artist. It was in a small, vibrant community in the heart of Georgia that Elijah Carter first discovered his love for art. Born to working-class parents, Elijah's childhood was filled with the sounds of jazz from his father's old radio and the sight of his mother sewing intricate patterns into patchwork quilts. Even as a child, Elijah's imagination seemed boundless. He would spend hours sketching scenes from his neighborhood: children playing under oak trees, vendors selling peaches at the market, and the lively Sunday gatherings at the local church. These were the moments that shaped his artistic vision and ignited a passion that would follow him for the rest of his life. But life wasn't easy for Elijah. Growing up as a black boy in the segregated South, he faced systemic barriers at every turn. Opportunities for formal art education were scarce, and even when he excelled, recognition often went to his white peers. Despite this, Elijah remained undeterred. He spent every spare moment drawing on scraps of paper and painting on pieces of wood he salvaged from construction sites. His art became his refuge, a place where he could express his deepest emotions and dreams. Challenges and early struggles. As Elijah grew older, his talent became undeniable. Friends and neighbors marveled at the lifelike portraits and abstract depictions he created, often comparing him to the greats like Jacob Lawrence and Romare Bearden. Encouraged by their praise, Elijah decided to pursue a career as a professional artist. However, breaking into the art world was far more difficult than he had anticipated. Elijah applied to countless galleries, art shows, and exhibitions, only to be met with rejection after rejection. His work, though undeniably skillful, was dismissed as too raw or lacking commercial appeal. Some gallery owners outright refused to meet with him, citing no interest in new artists. Beneath their words, Elijah could sense the unspoken prejudice that colored their judgments. Yet, for every door that closed, Elijah remained determined to keep knocking. He believed that his art had a story to tell, and he refused to let the biases of others silence his voice. To make ends meet, Elijah took on odd jobs, from waiting tables to cleaning offices. At night, he would return to his small apartment and lose himself in his art. He experimented with different mediums, blending vibrant colors with bold, textured strokes to create pieces that spoke to the struggles and triumphs of his community. Despite the lack of external validation, Elijah's confidence in his vision never wavered. The first encounter with the gallery owner. One day, Elijah learned of an upcoming gallery exhibition in downtown Atlanta that promised to feature promising new talent. The gallery, run by a well-known and respected owner named Victor Langston, had a reputation for launching the careers of emerging artists. Seeing this as the opportunity of a lifetime, Elijah painstakingly prepared a portfolio of his best work and mustered the courage to visit the gallery in person. When Elijah stepped into the gallery, he was immediately struck by its opulence. The walls were lined with carefully curated pieces, each accompanied by a small plaque bearing the artist's name and price. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive perfume, and the quiet hum of conversation suggested deals being made in hushed tones. Dressed in his best shirt and carrying his portfolio under his arm, Elijah approached a front desk, where a sharply dressed receptionist regarded him with a raised eyebrow. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone tinged with skepticism. "Yes, I'd like to speak with Mr. Langston," Elijah replied, his voice steady but his palms sweating. The receptionist glanced at his portfolio and smirked. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Elijah began, only to be interrupted. "Mr. Langston doesn't meet with just anyone. You can leave your portfolio, and we'll contact you if he's interested." Before Elijah could respond, a tall, silver-haired man emerged from an office nearby. It was Victor Langston himself. The receptionist whispered something to him, and he turned his piercing gaze toward Elijah. "What's this about?" Langston asked, his voice authoritative. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Mr. Langston, my name is Elijah Carter. I'm an artist, and I've brought some of my work to show you. I believe my pieces would resonate with your audience." Langston's eyes flicked to the worn portfolio in Elijah's hands. With a thin smile, he gestured for Elijah to open it. Eagerly, Elijah laid out his paintings, his heart pounding with anticipation. As Langston flipped through the pieces, his expression shifted from mild interest to barely concealed disdain. "These are interesting," he said finally, his tone dripping with condescension. "But I'm afraid they're not the kind of work we feature here. Our clientele expects sophistication and refinement." Elijah felt the sting of Langston's words, but tried to remain composed. "I understand," he said, "but I believe my art speaks to a unique perspective that many people can connect with. If you gave it a chance." Langston cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Look, young man, art isn't just about passion, it's about marketability. And frankly, your work doesn't fit our brand. I'd suggest you try one of the smaller, more accessible galleries." The words were a blow, but what hurt more was the patronizing smirk on Langston's face as he handed back the portfolio. As Elijah left the gallery, he felt a mix of anger, humiliation, and resolve. He vowed that one day he would prove Victor Langston wrong. That day, however, seemed far away, and the road ahead appeared more daunting than ever. The mockery at the gallery. Elijah Carter could not shake the sting of Victor Langston's dismissive words. For days they echoed in his mind. Art isn't just about passion, it's about marketability. Despite the pain, he couldn't let this rejection define him. Determined to try again, Elijah decided to attend the gallery's upcoming public exhibition, hoping to observe, learn, and perhaps make another impression. On the night of the exhibition, Elijah arrived at the gallery wearing his best suit. The space was buzzing with well-dressed patrons, artists, and collectors sipping champagne as they perused the carefully curated pieces. Elijah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he stepped through the doors. Clutching his portfolio tightly, he scanned the room for Victor Langston. It wasn't long before Elijah spotted him, standing in the center of a small crowd and speaking animatedly about a sculpture on display. Summoning his courage, Elijah approached. Langston noticed him and raised an eyebrow. "Ah, Mr. Carter, wasn't it?" Langston said, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. The crowd's attention turned to Elijah, their eyes flicking over his modest appearance. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied. "I wanted to thank you for your time the other day and take this opportunity to show you a few more pieces." He held out his portfolio, hoping Langston might reconsider. Langston's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "You're quite persistent, aren't you? Very well, let's have a look." Elijah opened the portfolio, revealing his vibrant, soulful paintings. The crowd leaned in, curious. Langston flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness, his expression remaining neutral until he reached the last piece. Then he chuckled, a low, derisive sound that cut through the air like a knife. "You've certainly got enthusiasm," Langston said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But this isn't exactly the caliber of work our patrons are looking for. It's quaint, folksy even, not the sort of thing one hangs in a penthouse or a boardroom." The crowd murmured. Some laughed quietly, while others exchanged knowing glances. Elijah's cheeks burned, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Art is about expression," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "It's about connecting with people, telling stories." Langston smirked. "Ah, the noble artist. Very poetic, Mr. Carter. But I'm afraid poetry doesn't pay the bills. Now, if you'll excuse me." He handed back the portfolio and turned away, dismissing Elijah as though he were no more significant than a speck of dust. Public humiliation. Elijah's hands trembled as he clutched his portfolio to his chest. The crowd dispersed, their curiosity replaced by disinterest. He felt exposed, as if the entire room had conspired to make him feel small. Fighting back tears, he turned and walked briskly out of the gallery, each step heavy with defeat. Once outside, Elijah sank onto a bench across the street, staring at the glowing windows of the gallery. He felt anger, shame, and a crushing sense of inadequacy. He'd put his heart into his work, only to have it mocked in front of an audience. For the first time in years, Elijah questioned whether he was on the right path. Encouragement from a friend. As Elijah sat lost in thought, a familiar voice broke through his despair. "Elijah, is that you?" Looking up, he saw Grace Mitchell, a fellow artist and longtime friend. Grace was a celebrated muralist known for her vibrant depictions of Black history and culture. She had mentored Elijah in his early years, often offering advice and encouragement. "Grace," Elijah said, managing a weak smile, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Grace replied, sitting beside him. "I saw you inside the gallery. What happened?" Elijah recounted the evening, his voice heavy with emotion. Grace listened intently, her brow furrowing as he described Langston's behavior. "That man has no idea what he's talking about," Grace said firmly when he finished. "Elijah, your work is powerful. It's real. Don't let some snob with a narrow view of art make you doubt yourself." "But how do I keep going?" Elijah asked. "Every time I try to put myself out there, I get knocked down." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "You keep going because your story deserves to be told. Because there are people out there who need to see what you create. Langston and his gallery aren't the only paths to success. Sometimes you have to build your own road." Her words sparked a flicker of hope in Elijah's heart. He thought of the kids in his neighborhood who'd grown up with dreams, but no one to encourage them. He thought of his parents, who had sacrificed so much to give him a chance at a better life. "You're right," Elijah said finally. "I can't let this stop me." Grace smiled. "That's the Elijah I know. Now, let's get you back to work. The world needs to see your brilliance, whether Langston recognizes it or not." With renewed determination, Elijah resolved to keep pushing forward. Langston's gallery might have been a setback, but it wouldn't be the end of his story. In fact, it was only the beginning. The breakthrough moment. A chance to showcase. After the debacle at Victor Langston's gallery, Elijah Carter returned to his small apartment with a renewed sense of determination. Grace's words resonated in his mind. Sometimes, you have to build your own road. Taking this advice to heart, Elijah decided to seek alternative opportunities to showcase his work. He spent days researching local exhibitions, art fairs, and online platforms that catered to emerging artists. Though he faced skepticism and limited resources, Elijah was relentless. One evening, while scrolling through an online artist forum, Elijah stumbled upon a call for submissions for a community art fair in downtown Atlanta. The event, hosted by a non-profit organization, aimed to support underrepresented artists by providing them with a platform to share their work. Though the event lacked the prestige of a high-profile gallery, Elijah saw it as a chance to connect with people who might genuinely appreciate his art. Using the little money he had saved, Elijah printed high-quality reproductions of his paintings and rented a modest booth at the fair. He spent hours preparing, carefully framing his pieces and writing descriptions that told the stories behind each one. On the morning of the event, he arrived early, setting up his booth with a mix of nervousness and excitement. The fair was a lively affair, filled with vibrant displays of creativity. Families strolled through the rows of booths, stopping to admire paintings, sculptures, and handmade crafts. Elijah's booth, with its bold and emotive artwork, quickly drew attention. Visitors were captivated by the vivid colors and the stories his paintings told, stories of resilience, community, and hope. Among the crowd was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an air of authority. She introduced herself as Lillian Devereux, a well-known art critic and collector. Lillian's discerning eye had launched the careers of several now-famous artists, and her presence at the fair was both unexpected and significant. Catching the attention of a major critic, Lillian paused in front of Elijah's booth, her gaze fixed on one of his pieces titled Roots of Resilience. The painting depicted a sprawling oak tree with deep, winding roots intertwining with the silhouettes of human figures. The vibrant hues of orange, green, and blue created a sense of motion and life, while the intricate details invited closer inspection. "This is remarkable," Lillian said, her voice breaking Elijah's concentration as he spoke with another visitor. Turning to face her, Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He recognized Lillian from articles he had read about influential figures in the art world. "Thank you," he said, trying to remain composed. "I'm glad it resonates with you." Lillian studied the painting for a moment longer before addressing him. "Your work has a unique voice. It's evocative, deeply personal, and yet universally relatable. Have you shown in any galleries?" Elijah hesitated, the memory of Langston's mockery still fresh in his mind. "Not yet," he admitted. "I had some setbacks, but I'm working on it." Lillian nodded thoughtfully. "Setbacks are part of the journey. What matters is how you move forward. I'd like to purchase this piece, and I'll be recommending your work to a few colleagues of mine. Expect to hear from me soon." Elijah could hardly believe his ears. Lillian purchased Roots of Resilience on the spot, leaving her business card and a promise to stay in touch. As she walked away, Elijah felt a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. For the first time, it felt like the tide was beginning to turn. The artist's rise to fame. True to her word, Lillian Devereux became a powerful advocate for Elijah's work. Within weeks, she featured his paintings in her widely read art column, praising his ability to blend raw emotion with masterful technique. The article garnered widespread attention, leading to a flood of inquiries from collectors, gallery owners, and media outlets. Soon, Elijah was invited to participate in a group exhibition at a prestigious gallery in New York City. The exhibition, titled Voices Unheard, focused on marginalized artists whose work challenged conventional narratives. Elijah's pieces became the centerpiece of the show, drawing praise from critics and audiences alike. His painting Roots of Resilience was prominently displayed, sparking conversations about identity, heritage, and the power of storytelling. The success of the exhibition catapulted Elijah into the spotlight. Collectors clamored to acquire his work, and the value of his paintings skyrocketed. Pieces he had once struggled to sell for a few $100s were now commanding prices in the tens of thousands. Elijah's inbox was flooded with invitations to exhibit at galleries, speak at events, and collaborate with other artists. Despite the whirlwind of success, Elijah remained grounded. He continued to draw inspiration from his community, creating works that celebrated their strength and resilience. He also made it a point to mentor young artists, offering them the guidance and support he had longed for during his early struggles. Reflection. As Elijah stood in his new studio, surrounded by completed and in-progress pieces, he thought back to that humiliating moment at Victor Langston's gallery. It felt like a lifetime ago. What Langston had dismissed as quaint and folksy was now being celebrated as groundbreaking and visionary. The irony was not lost on Elijah, but he chose not to dwell on it. Instead, he focused on the journey ahead, knowing that his story was far from over. A stunning return. Elijah Carter stood at the large windows of his spacious new studio, overlooking the bustling streets of New York City. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating the vibrancy of his artwork, which leaned against walls and stood on easels, waiting to be shipped to collectors or displayed at upcoming shows. The room echoed with the hum of a small gathering, Elijah's friends, fellow artists, and a few mentors, who had come to celebrate yet another milestone in his swiftly unfolding career. One of the country's top auction houses had just sold one of Elijah's pieces, a layered canvas painting titled Embers of Freedom, for an astonishing sum, officially pushing his art into the realm of million-dollar valuations. A few years ago, Elijah could not have fathomed such success. He had been scraping by in a cramped apartment in Atlanta, facing rejections from galleries and the condescending judgments of art gatekeepers. But times had changed dramatically. Ever since Lillian Devereux, the influential critic and collector, had recognized the emotive power of Elijah's work, his career had soared. Magazines clamored for interviews, social media buzzed about his paintings, and more than a handful of wealthy collectors fought over his newest creations. It had been a whirlwind, equal parts exciting and overwhelming. Tonight, however, Elijah felt something beyond pride or satisfaction. he felt a sense of resolve. Standing beside him was Grace Mitchell, the muralist who had encouraged him at one of his lowest points. She gave him a knowing smile. "You're unusually quiet for someone whose painting just sold for over $1 million, Grace teased, gently bumping his shoulder. Elijah smiled back, though his eyes were still lost in thought. "I'm just reflecting on how far everything has come, and how much further I want to go. You know, I always dreamed of success, but I also dreamed of making a lasting impact." Grace nodded. "You've already done both. Don't forget that." He reached for a glass of sparkling cider from a nearby tray, raised it to toast with Grace, and took a careful sip. "I'm thinking about the next step," he admitted. "I know we've talked about starting a community arts center or some program for underrepresented artists, but there's something else on my mind, too." "Tell me," Grace said, arching an eyebrow. Elijah exhaled. "I want to own a gallery, not just any gallery, a space where upcoming artists, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, can showcase their work without all the snobbery and gatekeeping that I went through. A place with heart." Grace beamed. "That sounds perfect for you. Your own vision, your own rules." Elijah's eyes twinkled with excitement, but he also had reservations. "It'll be expensive," he conceded. "Even with all the success, purchasing real estate in a big city isn't cheap, but I'm determined to see it through." They were interrupted by the arrival of a real estate agent, Mr. Bernard Lee, whom Elijah had invited to the gathering. He was a lean, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s, carrying an air of confidence that seemed well-earned. He approached Elijah with a polite smile, waiting for a pause in the conversation. "Elijah," Bernard said, "I have some news about that property you were interested in. The owner has officially listed it for sale. If you're still keen on acquiring a gallery space, this might be your best option." "Which one is this again?" Elijah asked, his curiosity piqued. "It's a well-known gallery in Atlanta," Bernard clarified, flipping through some documents. "From what I understand, it has a prime downtown location, a decent reputation, and a client list that spans decades. The owner is eager to sell for personal reasons, though I'm not entirely sure what those reasons are." Grace nudged Elijah. "Atlanta, that's your hometown. That'd be perfect if you want to give back to the community that shaped you." Elijah nodded, excitement creeping into his voice. "True, Atlanta has a booming art scene, and it's home for me. It'd feel right to have a base there, not just in New York." He turned back to Bernard. "What's the name of the gallery?" Bernard scanned his sheet. "Langston Arts," he read aloud. "Ever heard of it?" For a heartbeat, Elijah felt like the world stopped. All the chatter around him seemed to fade into a dull roar as his mind reeled. Langston Arts. The name lodged itself in his memory like a thorn. He recalled that day years ago, when he had first encountered Victor Langston, the towering figure who had dismissed him, mocked him, the man who once sneered at Elijah's vibrant canvases, calling them quaint, and not the caliber of work our patrons are looking for. A flood of emotions threatened to overwhelm Elijah. Anger at the humiliation, triumph at how far he'd come, and disbelief at this strange twist of fate. "Elijah," Bernard's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yes," Elijah said slowly, regaining his composure. "Yes, I've heard of Langston Arts." A surprise disclosure. Elijah spent the following days grappling with the possibility of buying the very gallery that had once turned him away. It was a perfect example of how swiftly the world could change, how life could come full circle. Part of him wanted to turn the offer down, feeling that stepping back into that gallery would drag up old wounds. But another part of him, fueled by the memory of that public humiliation, saw an irresistible opportunity to demonstrate just how much he had surpassed the petty judgments of the past. He asked Bernard for more information on the sale. After a flurry of phone calls and emails, Bernard arranged a private meeting with the gallery's representative, who was none other than Victor Langston himself. According to Bernard, Victor was making personal decisions to withdraw from the art business, though the reasons weren't entirely clear. Elijah's heart pounded at the thought of facing the man who had once dismissed him so harshly. He prepared himself for a conversation he'd never thought he would have. The tense meeting. The day of the meeting arrived sooner than Elijah would have liked. He flew into Atlanta early in the morning, his nerves clashing with his steady resolve. Dressed in a tailored suit, he made his way to the address Bernard had given him, a high-end restaurant known for power lunches among city elites. Elijah arrived to find a hostess who escorted him to a secluded corner table. Seated there, poring over some documents, was none other than Victor Langston. Victor looked almost the same as Elijah remembered, tall, silver-haired, and dressed in an impeccably tailored grey suit, but something about him seemed diminished. His once piercing eyes had dulled around the edges with what appeared to be fatigue or worry, and the faint lines on his face seemed deeper, heavier with the weight of time. When Victor looked up, his brow furrowed in mild confusion at first. He rose from his seat and extended a hand, his voice politely neutral. "Good afternoon. You must be Mr. Carter," he said, not yet recognizing Elijah. Elijah met his gaze steadily, shaking his hand. "Yes, Elijah Carter, it's good to meet you." For a moment, Victor's expression remained blank. Then realization flickered in his eyes, accompanied by a flash of embarrassment or uncertainty. He hesitated. "I believe we've crossed paths before, haven't we?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, several years ago, at your gallery. You told me my art wasn't the kind your patrons would appreciate." Victor swallowed, but quickly composed himself. "Right. Well, that was a long time ago." He gestured at the table. "Please, sit." They both took their seats, a tense silence settling over them momentarily. Victor cleared his throat. "I understand you're interested in purchasing the gallery. We're seeking a buyer who can maintain its legacy or at least preserve some of the brand identity. Langston Arts has been around for over 40 years. Elijah wanted to laugh at the irony of preserving brand identity, considering how deeply that brand had once sought to exclude him. But he stayed composed. "Yes, I'm interested. My main goal was to create a space for diverse voices in the art world. I believe Atlanta is right for that. The question is whether Langston Arts is flexible enough for my vision." Victor offered a guarded smile. "I see. Well, it would certainly continue to hold exhibitions for talented up-and-coming artists. We've done so for decades, though," he paused. "I suppose we could have done more to be inclusive." Elijah allowed the statement to hang in the air, not yet ready to acknowledge it with forgiveness. Instead, he shifted to the matter at hand. "I'd like to walk through the property and get a sense of the space. Then we can talk numbers." "Of course," Victor said, relief evident in his voice. "I'm still the legal owner, but I'll hand you over the official details once we reach an agreement."